"Play the song I promised her," Mason Reed said, then drew Vanessa Cole into his arms while Emma Hale stood close enough to hear every word. The first notes rose from the string quartet beneath the chandeliers of Silverpine Hall, soft and elegant, but Emma felt each one land like a public verdict. Mason had chosen that melody 2 years earlier, back when he had still called her his future mate and practiced the steps with her in the empty meeting room after pack council. Now Vanessa wore deep crimson silk, the color Mason once said belonged to celebrations, and rested one gloved hand against his shoulder as if the place had always been hers. Around them, nearly 200 guests shifted toward the dance floor. Crystal glasses paused halfway to painted lips. Conversations thinned into whispers. Emma remained beside a marble column at the edge of the ballroom, her hands folded over the front of her dark blue gown. The dress was simple, long-sleeved, and carefully mended along one cuff. She had selected it because it asked for no attention. Tonight, that offered no protection. Mason turned Vanessa through the first measure and glanced directly at Emma. The look lasted only a second, polished enough to pass as accidental, but she knew him too well. He wanted to see whether she would leave. 3 months had passed since he rejected her before the Silverpine Council, calling their bond an error that threatened his future as Alpha. He had claimed the decision was necessary for the pack. Vanessa's smile made the truth easier to understand. Emma felt heat climb beneath her collar, followed by the cold awareness of every person pretending not to watch. Her wolf pressed restlessly beneath her ribs, not with anger, but with the instinct to retreat from a room that no longer felt safe. The western doors stood less than 30 feet away. She could cross the distance before the song ended. Tomorrow, the pack would say she had been too fragile to witness Mason's happiness. By next week, they would remember her departure more clearly than his cruelty. Emma loosened her fingers. She would not give him that ending. "You should go," whispered Rachel Moore, an older Omega standing. Near the refreshment table, concern softened the woman's voice. "No one would blame you." Emma watched Mason guide Vanessa through the turn he had once taught her. "That is exactly why I am staying." Rachel studied her, then gave one small nod. At the far end of the hall, a silver staff struck the floor. The music continued, but the room changed before the herald spoke. Alpha King Adrian Blackwood entered beneath the carved archway with 2 royal guards several paces behind him. He wore a formal black coat edged with restrained silver embroidery, and his dark hair was swept back from a face that gave nothing away. Every alpha in the room lowered his head. Mason nearly missed a step before recovering and drawing Vanessa closer. Emma bowed with the others, grateful for the momentary shelter of lowered eyes. When she looked up, Adrian was not watching the dancers nearest him. His gaze moved across the ballroom with quiet precision, taking in the ranks, the alliances, and the spaces people had deliberately left empty. For one unsettling instant, his eyes reached the edge of the floor and stopped on Emma. She could not tell whether he saw a rejected Omega standing alone or simply another guest beneath the chandeliers. Then Mason laughed at something Vanessa whispered and turned her again, making certain the king could see them. Emma understood at last that this was not merely a celebration. Mason had arranged the entire first dance as a declaration of who belonged at the center and who had been pushed outside it. The song had only begun, and he was already waiting for her to disappear. The first dance ended beneath careful applause. Mason bowed to Vanessa as though the room had witnessed a royal ceremony rather than a personal cruelty, then kept her hand resting on his arm while guests closed around them. Emma remained beside the marble column. Her knees felt unsteady, but she did not move toward the western doors. Rachel offered her a glass of water. Emma accepted it and took one measured sip. Across the ballroom, Adrian climbed the shallow steps to the royal platform. He spoke briefly with the Silverpine elders, receiving their greetings without warmth or impatience. From that height, he could see every invitation offered, every alliance displayed, and every person left standing alone. Emma felt his attention pass over the room again, but she refused to search for it. She had already spent too many months measuring herself through the eyes of powerful men. The quartet began a livelier song. Couples returned to the floor, filling the space Mason and Vanessa had claimed. Emma shifted farther along the wall, not to hide, but to clear the path for older guests moving toward their seats. 2 young Omegas glanced at her and whispered behind their fans. One looked embarrassed when Emma met her eyes. The other turned away. Their discomfort no longer surprised her. Rejection made people behave as though misfortune could spread through conversation. Mason appeared near the refreshment table with Vanessa beside him. "Still here?" he asked. His tone was light enough for anyone listening to mistake it for concern. Emma set down her glass. "I was invited." Vanessa smiled, smooth and bright. "Of course you were. Tradition requires every unmated member of the pack to attend." The word unmated landed exactly where she intended. Mason did not correct her. Instead, he looked toward the royal platform. "Tonight matters for Silverpine. Try not to draw attention." Emma almost laughed. He had chosen her promise song, watched for her reaction, and now warned her against being noticed. "Then you should stop speaking to me in public," she said. Vanessa's smile faltered. Mason's eyes cooled, but before he could answer, an elder approached to request his presence. He left with Vanessa, maintaining the appearance of control. Emma released the breath she had held. Rachel touched her elbow. "You did not give him what he wanted." "Not yet," Emma said. The truth tasted sharper than courage. She knew Mason would not be satisfied by one failed attempt. Near the center of the room, the herald announced Adrian's formal welcome. Every guest turned toward the platform. The Alpha King spoke without ornament, thanking Silverpine for its hospitality and reminding the assembled packs that alliances were measured by conduct as much as bloodline. The sentence was general enough to be diplomatic, but Mason's shoulders stiffened. Emma noticed. When Adrian finished, the orchestra resumed, and the room loosened around its own relief. Emma could have taken that moment to leave unnoticed. Instead, she stepped away from the column and moved to a place beside the dance floor where no curtain, servant, or arrangement of flowers could hide her. Her pulse quickened as the open space exposed her to the room. The choice felt small, almost foolish, yet it belonged entirely to her. From the royal platform, Adrian watched the Omega who had been pushed to the edge place herself where everyone could see her. Mason noticed too. His expression changed, not to anger, but calculation. Emma understood the new danger at once. By refusing to disappear, she had forced him to choose whether to ignore her or humiliate her again. Emma had taken only 3 steps into the open when a young server caught the edge of a rug with his heel. The silver tray in his hands tilted, sending crystal glasses sliding toward the marble floor. Gasps rose before the first glass landed. Emma moved without thinking. She caught the tray against her forearm, steadied 2 glasses with her free hand, and lowered the rest onto a nearby table before they could fall. The server stood frozen, pale beneath the ballroom lights. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I should have seen the rug." Emma looked down. One corner had curled upward where a guest had stepped across it. "The rug shifted," she said, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "You did not cause it." A noblewoman frowned at the drop of wine darkening Emma's sleeve. "Careless service reflects poorly on the pack." The young man lowered his head. Emma could feel the room preparing to accept the easiest version of events. A servant had failed. An Omega had been stained. Nothing important had happened. Then the pack should fix the rug before someone else trips, Emma replied. She bent, smoothed the corner flat, and asked the server for a cloth. He hurried to obey. When he returned, Emma took it from him and blotted the wine herself, removing his need to stand beneath more judgment. "Thank you, Miss Hale," he said. "Go finish your work," she told him gently. "And watch the eastern corner. It is loose too." He nodded and disappeared toward the service doors. Rachel approached, concern in her eyes. "Your dress. It will dry." Emma turned the stained sleeve inward. Across the floor, Mason had seen everything. His mouth tightened, not because she had been embarrassed, but because she had drawn attention without asking his permission. Vanessa leaned close to him and murmured something that made him glance toward the royal platform. Emma followed the movement before she could stop herself. Adrian was watching her. He stood beside an elderly council advisor, one hand resting lightly against the back of a carved chair. His expression remained unreadable, but his gaze moved from the secured rug to the doorway where the server had vanished, then back to Emma. He had not seen a graceful rescue. He had seen her refuse to purchase safety with someone else's humiliation. The knowledge unsettled her. Royal attention was not kindness. It could turn a small act into rumor before the music changed. Emma stepped toward Rachel, intending to disappear into ordinary conversation, but the council advisor spoke quietly to Adrian. The king answered without taking his eyes from the floor. A moment later, one of his guards descended the platform and crossed toward the service corridor. Emma's stomach tightened. She had protected the server from public blame only to send royal scrutiny after him. "Stay here," she told Rachel. She moved after the guard, keeping to the edge of the dancers until she reached the corridor entrance. The guard had stopped the server beside a linen cart. "His Majesty wishes to know who secured the rug before the ball," he said. The young man looked terrified. Emma stepped forward. "The staff checked it this afternoon. Too many guests crossed that corner after the doors opened." The guard studied her. The king did not ask who should be punished. He asked how the hazard was missed. Emma glanced toward the ballroom. Adrian had shifted slightly on the platform, giving her a clear line of sight. He was not searching for a scapegoat. He was testing whether the hall corrected mistakes honestly. "Then tell him the rug needs a second fastening strip," she said. "And tell him the server prevented a worse accident by carrying the tray close to his body." The guard inclined his head and returned to the ballroom. The young man released a shaky breath. "Why did you help me?" Emma looked toward Mason, who was already guiding Vanessa into another circle of admiration. Because being watched should not make cruelty easier. When she returned to the floor, Adrian's advisor was speaking in the king's ear again. This time, Adrian looked directly at Emma, no longer with passing curiosity, but with the attention of a man who had begun to ask why the quietest person in the room was the one everyone else kept underestimating. Mason waited until the next song ended before making his move. He guided Vanessa toward the center of the ballroom, where several pack leaders had gathered beneath the silver banners, and called for Emma with the easy confidence of a man certain she would obey. "Miss Hale," he said, loud enough to draw nearby attention. "Come meet our guests." Emma crossed the floor because refusing from a distance would let him define the gesture as fear. Rachel remained near the wall, watching with concern. Vanessa stood at Mason's side, one hand curved around his arm. Up close, her crimson gown was even more deliberate. A narrow silver clasp at her shoulder matched the ceremonial color once reserved for an alpha's intended mate. Mason introduced her first. Vanessa Cole, the woman who has brought stability back to Silverpine. Several guests offered polite approval. Then he turned toward Emma. "And this is Emma Hale. She and I were once considered compatible." Once considered. The phrase reduced years of shared plans to an administrative mistake. One of the visiting alphas glanced between the women. The rejected bond. Mason smiled as if discussing an old trade agreement. A necessary correction. Emma understands that leadership requires difficult choices. The room nearest them quieted. Emma felt every face waiting to see whether she would defend herself, break down, or confirm Mason's version through silence. Vanessa lowered her eyes with practiced sympathy. "We all hope she finds a place suited to her." Emma looked at Mason, not Vanessa. "You made your choice 3 months ago." Her voice remained calm. "You do not need to keep making it in front of an audience." A few guests looked away. Mason's smile held, but only just. "I was trying to prevent confusion. Then be clear." Emma folded her hands before her stained sleeve. "You rejected me. That ended the bond. It did not make my life part of your announcement." The words were not loud, yet they traveled beyond the circle. On the royal platform, Adrian stopped speaking with his advisor. Mason noticed the shift in attention and stepped closer to Emma. "You are still a member of Silverpine. Your conduct reflects on this pack. So does yours." Vanessa drew a breath. Mason's eyes sharpened, but Emma did not lower hers. She had spent months preparing answers she never believed she would say aloud. Now that one had escaped, the fear beneath it changed shape. It was no longer telling her to disappear. It was asking what would happen if she stayed visible. Adrian descended one step from the platform, not enough to interrupt, but enough for the nearest council members to notice. Mason immediately turned toward him and bowed. "Your Majesty, I hope our private history has not disturbed the evening." Adrian's gaze moved from Mason to Emma. "Private history does not usually require this many witnesses." The reply was mild. Its effect was not. Mason straightened. "I only wish to ensure Miss Hale's position was understood." "Is it not hers to explain?" Adrian asked. Silence settled over the group. Emma felt the question reach her before the king's eyes did. No one had asked what she wanted the room to understand. Mason had spoken for her during the rejection, after it, and now at the ball. Adrian had used a single sentence to expose the habit. Emma answered before Mason could recover. My position is simple, Your Majesty. I came because I belong to Silverpine. I stayed because leaving would have allowed someone else to decide that I did not. Adrian held her gaze. Something in his expression changed, subtle but unmistakable. Respect had replaced curiosity. Mason saw it too. His fingers tightened around Vanessa's hand. The music resumed behind them, but the circle did not move until Adrian inclined his head to Emma. Then remain, he said. The hall is not smaller because you are seen. He returned to the platform, leaving Mason with an audience he no longer controlled. Emma stepped away before Mason could answer. For the first time that evening, the whispers following her did not sound like pity. They sounded like the beginning of doubt. Emma expected Adrian to return to the royal platform and leave the moment behind him. Instead, 15 minutes later, she found him standing near the tall windows overlooking Silverpine's snow-covered courtyard, away from the densest part of the ballroom. He had dismissed his guards to a respectful distance. The choice made the invitation clear without making it public. Emma approached because ignoring a king would create more attention than accepting a conversation. Your Majesty. Adrian turned from the glass. You said you stayed because you belong here. I do. Then why have you spent the evening standing where the room can pretend you do not? The question was too precise to dismiss. Emma looked toward the dancers reflected in the window. Because being present is not the same as asking to be seen. No, Adrian said. But sometimes people use silence as permission. She thought of Mason introducing her as a correction, Vanessa offering pity like a favor, and every guest waiting for her to accept the smaller place they had prepared. You believe I should have confronted him sooner. I believe you should decide what your silence means before someone else decides for you. His voice held no accusation. That made the answer harder. Emma clasped her hands to keep from touching the wine stain on her sleeve. When Mason rejected me, the council watched him speak for both of us. Afterward, everyone treated distance as dignity. If I objected, I was bitter. If I stayed quiet, I was reasonable. Either way, he remained the one who defined what happened. Adrian's gaze settled on her face. And tonight? Tonight, he wanted me to leave. Why did you not? Emma looked across the ballroom. Mason stood beneath the silver banners, listening to an elder while Vanessa accepted compliments beside him. Because I finally understood that leaving would not protect me. It would only make his version easier to believe. Adrian was silent for several beats. The orchestra shifted into a slower piece, and couples moved closer to the center. You are not waiting for someone to rescue you, he said. Emma met his eyes. No. The word came without hesitation. Then what are you waiting for? No one had asked her that either. She considered the western doors, the edge of the floor, and the place she had occupied since arriving. A reason to stay that belongs to me. Something changed in Adrian's expression. Until that moment, his attention had felt judicial, as though he were examining a dispute. Now it became personal, not possessive, intent. Before he could answer, a royal advisor approached and bowed. Your Majesty, the Master of Ceremonies is ready to announce the traditional royal dance. Emma felt the significance immediately. At every pack ball, the Alpha King selected one partner. The choice was ceremonial, political, and impossible to ignore. Adrian glanced toward the women already gathering near the front of the ballroom. Daughters of powerful alphas adjusted gloves and straightened jeweled collars. Vanessa moved closer to Mason, her crimson gown bright among darker colors. They have expectations, Emma said. They always do, Adrian replied. Do you? She looked at him carefully. I expect the king to choose what best serves the kingdom. Adrian's mouth curved, not quite a smile. That is what everyone says when they hope the choice will favor them. The advisor waited. Music faded behind the conversations as the room prepared for the announcement. Adrian stepped past Emma, then paused. You told Mason that your life was not part of his announcement. His eyes held hers. Do not let the next announcement decide it either. He returned to the platform, leaving Emma beside the windows with a new and unsettling understanding. Until now, the night had been about enduring Mason's choices. As Adrian took his place above the ballroom and the herald raised the silver staff, Emma realized the next choice might belong to someone who had been watching her all along. The silver staff struck the floor 3 times, and the ballroom emptied from the center outward. Couples stepped back beneath the chandeliers while the master of ceremonies announced the royal dance. Emma moved away from the windows and returned to the edge of the floor, where the room could see her without mistaking her position for an invitation. Across the hall, daughters of prominent alphas formed a graceful line near the platform. Vanessa joined them without being asked. Mason stood beside her, satisfaction returning to his face as though the evening had finally resumed its proper order. His Majesty will select one partner, the Master of Ceremonies said. The chosen dance represents harmony among the northern packs. Emma heard the political meaning beneath the tradition. Adrian could reward an ally, calm a rival, or strengthen a treaty with a single turn around the floor. Mason leaned toward Vanessa and adjusted the silver clasp at her shoulder. The gesture was intimate enough to be noticed and formal enough to suggest approval. Then he looked toward Emma. "You should move behind the receiving line," he said when she came within hearing distance. "The royal selection is not meant for unattached omegas without standing." Emma held his gaze. "I am not in the receiving line. You are still too visible." Vanessa touched Mason's sleeve. "Perhaps she plans to watch. There is no harm in that." Her kindness sounded rehearsed. Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You have already caused enough discussion. Leave after the announcement." Quietly, Emma looked toward Adrian. He stood above the floor with one hand resting beside the royal chair, listening while his advisor finished a final explanation. His face revealed nothing. She remembered his warning near the windows. "Do not let the next announcement decide your life." "I will leave when I choose," she told Mason. "Not when you decide the room has seen enough of me." His expression hardened. "You are challenging your alpha. You rejected the bond that gave you the right to call this personal." Mason glanced around to see who had heard. That instinct told Emma more than his answer could. He was not worried about disrespect. He was worried about losing control of the story. The musicians lifted their bows, but waited for Adrian's signal. Mason turned toward the platform and forced a courteous smile. "Remain here, then, but do not mistake tolerance for importance." He guided Vanessa toward the front, placing her between two noble women whose families controlled valuable borderlands. Emma stayed where she was. Her heart beat hard enough to disturb the fabric at her collar, yet the fear no longer urged her toward the doors. It sharpened her attention. She saw Adrian speak to his advisor, then look across the assembled women. His gaze passed over jeweled gowns, perfect posture, and carefully prepared smiles. Mason straightened as Adrian descended the first step. Vanessa raised her chin. The room seemed to inhale as one. Emma expected the king to turn toward the receiving line. Instead, his eyes found her at the opposite edge of the floor. Mason followed that line of sight and went still. Adrian did not move yet, but the distance between the platform and Emma had become visible to everyone. The Master of Ceremonies lifted his hand to begin the formal invitation. Before he could speak, Mason crossed half the space between Emma and the dancers. "Stand behind the column," he ordered under his breath. Emma looked at the shadowed place he had chosen for her, then back at the open floor. No. It was the first refusal she gave him without explanation. The word left no argument for him to reshape. Mason stopped, caught between making a scene and allowing her to remain. Above them, Adrian stepped down from the platform. Adrian descended only 2 steps before his advisor touched his sleeve and murmured something too low for the ballroom to hear. The king paused. That single hesitation gave Mason the opening he wanted. He turned toward one of his senior guards, a broad-shouldered beta named Grant, and spoke with the quiet authority of an alpha issuing a routine instruction. "Escort Miss Hale behind the western column until the selection is complete." Grant approached Emma with visible discomfort. "Miss Hale, please come with me." Emma looked past him to Mason. Vanessa had already taken her place at the front of the receiving line, crimson silk bright beneath the chandeliers. Mason stood several feet behind her, wearing the calm expression of a man who expected obedience to erase the problem. "Why?" Emma asked. Grant lowered his voice. "The Alpha believes your position may distract from the ceremony." "My position is standing." Several guests nearby heard her. Their attention sharpened. Grant glanced toward Mason, waiting for a less humiliating order, but none came. "I do not want to force the matter," he said. Emma believed him. That made her refusal easier, not harder. "Then do not." She remained beside the open floor. Her hands were cold beneath her gloves, but her shoulders stayed level. Mason crossed toward them, careful to keep his voice pleasant. "Emma, this is not a debate." "No," she said. "It is another attempt to decide where I am allowed to be. You are making yourself the center of attention. I have not moved. The truth exposed him more cleanly than anger could have. Mason looked around and saw that too many people were listening. Vanessa turned from the receiving line, concern arranged across her face. Perhaps Emma only needs a quiet place to recover. Emma met her gaze. I am not unwell. Mason stepped closer. You will follow the pack's direction. His tone carried the weight of rank, the pressure every lower wolf had been trained to feel. Emma's wolf stirred beneath her ribs, instinct urging submission. For one breath, the room seemed to narrow around his command. Then she remembered the western doors she had refused, the servant she had protected, and Adrian asking what her silence meant. Emma lifted her chin. Your authority governs pack duties. It does not require me to hide behind a column because my presence embarrasses you. Grant stepped back. He would not become the hand Mason used to move her. That refusal created a new silence, one more dangerous than argument. Mason's face remained composed, but a pulse moved at his jaw. On the platform, Adrian had not resumed his conversation. He was watching, not only Emma. He was watching Grant step away, Mason hold his ground, and the room measure whether rank would prevail over dignity. The king's advisor spoke again. Adrian answered with a brief question. The advisor looked toward Emma, then toward the server corridor where the young man from earlier had disappeared. Emma could not hear the exchange, but she saw the advisor nod once. Something was being confirmed, though not yet revealed. Mason returned to Vanessa and placed her at the very front of the line. Stand tall, he told her, loud enough for Emma to hear. The king notices confidence. Vanessa smiled and faced the platform. Emma stayed at the edge of the floor, fully visible now. Adrian descended another step. His gaze passed over the women waiting for selection, then settled on Emma with the certainty of a decision not yet announced. Mason saw it. For the first time that evening, he looked afraid of what the king might choose. Adrian's advisor stepped forward before the master of ceremonies could begin the formal selection. He carried no parchment, no ceremonial object, only the quiet authority of someone bringing the king an answer. Your Majesty, he said, the server from the eastern corridor has confirmed Miss Hale's account. She protected him from blame, corrected the hazard, and asked for no recognition. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Emma felt heat rise beneath her collar. The moment she had tried to keep small had been brought into the center of the room. Mason's eyes narrowed. Vanessa's smile vanished. Adrian looked toward Emma, then toward the advisor. And the household staff? 3 of them gave similar accounts. Miss Hale has repeatedly intervened when lower-ranking members were treated unfairly. She did so before your arrival tonight. The reveals settled differently than praise. Adrian had not been watching her because she was wounded, beautiful, or useful to an alliance. He had been testing whether the dignity she defended for herself was the same dignity she offered when no powerful person was watching. Emma understood why his attention had sharpened after the spilled tray. He had not mistaken kindness for weakness. He had measured it as character. Mason recovered first. Your Majesty, with respect, small acts of service are admirable, but the royal dance carries political meaning. Adrian's gaze moved to him. So does the way an alpha treats those who cannot benefit him. The sentence cut through the room without anger. Several pack leaders shifted their attention toward Mason. Vanessa glanced down at the silver clasp on her shoulder, as though its significance had become less certain. Adrian descended the final step from the platform. The women in the receiving line straightened. Emma's pulse changed. Until that moment, she had believed the king was deciding whether to intervene. Now she saw the decision had already been made. The consequence arrived before he crossed half the floor. Mason stepped directly into his path. Your Majesty, he said, bowing low enough to remain respectful while blocking the clearest route to Emma. Silverpine would be honored if you chose a partner who represents stability between our houses. He extended one hand toward Vanessa. Miss Cole has stood beside my leadership throughout a difficult transition. Adrian stopped. Every person in the ballroom understood what Mason had done. He had turned the royal dance into a test of authority. If Adrian passed him without comment, Mason would lose face before his own pack. If Adrian accepted the suggestion, Emma would become invisible again beneath a more polished version of the same judgment. Emma felt the old instinct return. Leave now. Spare everyone the conflict. Let powerful men resolve the meaning of her presence without her. Then Mason looked at her over Adrian's shoulder, and the confidence in his face revealed what he expected. He believed she would retreat before the choice reached her. Emma stepped away from the wall, not toward the doors, toward the open floor. The movement was small, but it changed the geometry of the room. She was no longer waiting where she had been placed. Adrian saw her. Mason saw him see her. Miss Hale is not part of this ceremony, Mason said quietly. Adrian's expression hardened. She was invited. As a pack member, not as a political equal. Emma stopped at the edge of the dance floor. Then perhaps the problem is not where I am standing, she said, but what you believe standing means. Mason turned toward her. Do not embarrass Silverpine further. I have not embarrassed Silverpine. Her voice carried farther than she intended, yet it did not shake. I refuse to hide. You are the one making that difficult. The room went still. Adrian did not answer for her. He let the words belong to Emma. That restraint mattered more than protection. Mason had expected the king to silence him or rescue her. Instead, Adrian allowed Emma's choice to create its own consequence. The watching pack began to separate into those who admired Mason's control and those who now questioned it. The royal dance had become more than tradition. It had become a public judgment on whose version of Emma the room would accept. Adrian stepped around Mason. He passed Vanessa without slowing. Then he began walking toward Emma. Adrian crossed the ballroom without looking toward the receiving line again. Each step made the silence heavier. Noble daughters lowered their hands. Pack leaders shifted aside. Mason remained near Vanessa, rigid beneath the silver banners, while Emma stood at the edge of the dance floor with every instinct telling her that the entire room had narrowed to the space between herself and the king. Adrian passed the place where the first dance had begun. He passed the marble column Mason had ordered her to stand behind. He passed 3 women whose families could have strengthened his borders with a single public choice. He did not slow until he was 6 feet from Emma. Her pulse pressed hard against the high neckline of her gown. She had imagined many versions of humiliation that evening, but none in which the Alpha King crossed the room for her. That made the moment more dangerous, not less. If she mistook ceremony for kindness, the room would remember. If she stepped back, Mason would call it proof that she had never belonged in the open. Adrian stopped. He did not extend his hand yet. Miss Hale, he said. His voice was quiet, but the ballroom carried it. You told me you wanted a reason to remain that belonged to you. Emma glanced toward Mason. He was watching with a disbelief that had begun to crack into anger. Vanessa stood beside him, no longer displaying confidence, only uncertainty. Adrian followed Emma's gaze, then returned his attention to her. Do not answer them, he said. Answer yourself. The words steadied something inside her. This was not an order disguised as rescue. He was placing the decision where it had been denied all evening. The master of ceremonies waited beside the musicians, one hand still raised. No one moved. Emma looked at Adrian's face, searching for pity. She found none. His expression held the same measured focus he had shown when asking about the loose rug, the same respect that had appeared when she refused to hide. Why me? She asked. A small reaction passed through the room. No one questioned a royal selection before it was offered. Adrian did not seem offended. Because when this room gave you every reason to become cruel, you protected someone with less power than you. His gaze did not leave hers. Because you remained when leaving would have made another man's story easier. And because rank should not be the only quality a king is willing to see. Emma felt the words reach places Mason's rejection had left raw, but she did not let gratitude make the choice for her. And if I say no? Adrian answered without hesitation. Then I return to the platform, and your place in this hall remains yours. That was the proof she needed. Across the floor, Mason stepped forward. Emma, consider what this will imply. She turned toward him. His warning revealed that he still believed her decisions existed in relation to his comfort. It will imply that I was asked, she said. Nothing more than I choose. Mason stopped. Emma faced Adrian again. The king raised one hand slowly, not yet crossing the final distance. His palm remained open between them, an invitation visible to every person in Silverpine Hall. The orchestra waited. The chandeliers burned above the empty floor. Emma looked at the hand that offered no claim, then at the path Adrian had crossed to reach her. For the first time that night, the next movement belonged entirely to her. Emma lifted her hand and placed it in Adrian's. The contact was warm, steady, and entirely still for one breath, as though he understood that accepting an invitation did not mean surrendering control. Only when she closed her fingers did he guide her toward the center of the ballroom. The musicians began at once. A slow waltz rose beneath the chandeliers, replacing the silence with measured strings. Adrian kept a respectful distance, one hand holding hers, the other resting lightly at the proper place behind her waist. He did not pull her closer than the dance required. Emma followed the first step, then the second. Her body remembered the rhythm Mason had once taught her, but Adrian's lead felt different. Mason had always corrected before she could finish moving. Adrian waited long enough to learn how she moved. Around them, the room remained frozen at the edges. The noble daughters who had prepared for the royal selection watched without disguise. The young server stood near the eastern corridor, holding an empty tray against his chest. Rachel pressed one hand to her mouth. Vanessa had stepped away from Mason, leaving a visible space between them. Every thread from the evening had drawn toward the same floor. Emma could feel Mason's attention more sharply than the music, but she refused to look at him. Adrian turned her once, smoothly, and the deep blue fabric of her gown moved across the marble. "You are waiting for something to go wrong," he said quietly. "Most public kindness has a price. This is not kindness." The answer tightened her chest. "Then what is it?" Adrian guided her through another turn. "Recognition." Emma searched his face. "From a king, those can look the same. Then judge the action, not the title." He loosened his hold slightly, giving her enough space to step away without disrupting the dance. She understood the gesture. He would not trap her inside the choice she had made. Emma stayed. The room saw that too. At the next measure, Adrian changed direction, bringing her past the receiving line. Vanessa lowered her gaze as they passed. Mason did not. His expression had lost its polished ease. The royal dance had not merely excluded him. It had taken the woman he tried to place at the edge and moved her through the center of every alliance he valued. "You should know," Emma said. "They will claim you chose me to humiliate him." Adrian's eyes remained on hers. "Did you accept to humiliate him?" "No." "Then his interpretation is not the center of this dance." The words landed with quiet force. Emma felt something inside her release, not the pain of rejection, but the habit of arranging every decision around Mason's reaction. Adrian raised their joined hands and guided her through a final turn. This time, Emma did not follow because she feared making a mistake. She stepped fully into the movement and let the room see her. The music approached its final note. Before it could end, Mason moved onto the floor. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying beyond the dancers. The orchestra faltered. Adrian stopped without releasing Emma's hand. Mason faced them, trying to reclaim authority through posture alone. "Your Majesty, the ceremony has made its point. Emma remains a member of Silverpine, and her future must be handled within pack law." The ballroom shifted from wonder to expectation. Everyone looked toward Adrian, waiting for the king to answer. Emma felt his hand remain open around hers, supportive but not controlling. This was the moment Mason expected another man to speak for her. Emma stepped half a pace forward before Adrian could respond. "No," she said. The word crossed the room more clearly than the music had. Mason stared at her. Emma released Adrian's hand by her own choice and faced the alpha who had spent the entire evening defining her place. "You ended the bond," she said. "You do not get to keep the authority after giving up the responsibility." Mason stared at Emma as though the words had come from someone else. For months, he had depended on her restraint. He had mistaken silence for agreement, grief for weakness, and her refusal to shame him for proof that he still controlled the meaning of their past. Now she stood in the center of Silverpine Hall with Adrian beside her and no longer allowed either man to define her. "You are still bound to this pack," Mason said. "Pack law gives the alpha authority over matters that affect its standing." Emma heard the old pressure beneath his voice, the expectation that rank would finish what reason could not. Her wolf recoiled, then steadied. She had already crossed the floor. She would not return to the edge inside herself. "My conduct affects Silverpine," she said. "My future does not belong to it." Mason glanced toward the elders, inviting tradition to speak for him. None stepped forward. The room was waiting for Emma now. That realization changed her breathing. She no longer needed to convince everyone. She needed only to say the truth clearly enough that no one could pretend not to hear it. "When you rejected me," she continued, You stood before the council and said our bond was a mistake. You asked to be released from every promise connected to it. I accepted because I would not force someone to remain where he did not wish to stay. Mason's face tightened. That does not remove your duty. Duty is not ownership. Emma's voice remained calm. You cannot discard the bond when it limits you, then reclaim its authority when my choices embarrass you. A murmur moved through the guests. This time, she did not shrink from it. Vanessa stood several feet behind Mason, her crimson gown suddenly less like victory and more like evidence of the choice he had already made. Emma looked at her briefly, then back at Mason. You chose another woman. I am not challenging that. I am challenging your belief that choosing her gave you the right to erase me. Mason's composure broke at the edges. You are using the king's attention to elevate yourself. The accusation reached the fear Emma had carried since Adrian offered his hand. She could have hidden behind royal favor. She could have let Adrian answer and allowed the room to call her protected. Instead, she stepped away from him. The distance was only one pace, but it made the truth visible. She stood alone before her alpha, supported but not shielded. I released the king's hand before I spoke, she said. I am not borrowing his authority. I am using my own voice. Adrian remained exactly where she had left him. He did not interrupt. He did not claim her. His restraint gave her words room to stand without becoming a royal decree. Mason looked toward him anyway. Your Majesty, surely you see the disorder this creates. Adrian's expression was unreadable. Miss Hale has not asked me to decide. The answer returned the matter to Emma. No rescue. No coincidence. No authority replacing hers. Mason had nowhere left to turn except the woman he had expected to silence. Emma held his gaze. I will fulfill every lawful duty I owe Silverpine. I will work, contribute, and answer for my conduct. But you will not select where I stand, whom I speak to, or whether I may accept an invitation. Those choices are mine. And if I refuse? Mason asked. Emma felt the room tighten. This was the final edge. If she softened now, every earlier refusal would become temporary. She drew one breath. Then I will petition the Royal Council for transfer from Silverpine and leave under law, not shame. The possibility struck Mason harder than anger would have. Emma's family managed several of the pack's winter supply routes. Her departure would create questions he could not dismiss as wounded pride. More important, it proved she was willing to accept consequences rather than remain under false protection. Mason looked around the hall and saw no easy victory. If he forced the issue, he would confirm everything she had said. If he yielded, he would lose the authority he had tried to display. At last, he stepped back. Your personal invitations are your own, he said stiffly. It was not an apology. It was a boundary spoken aloud before witnesses. Emma accepted it for what it was, not kindness, but consequence. Then we understand each other. Mason returned to Vanessa, though he no longer looked like the center of the room. Emma turned toward Adrian. He waited without extending his hand again. Was that the answer you wanted? She asked. It was not mine to want, he said, but it was yours to give. The musicians remained silent, uncertain whether the dance had ended. Emma looked at the open floor, then at Adrian. We were interrupted before the final measure. A quiet warmth entered his expression. He offered his hand a second time, lower now, private despite the audience. Emma took it because she chose to finish what she had begun. The orchestra resumed, and when they completed the final turn, the applause belonged not to a king who had rescued her, but to an Omega who had refused to be spoken for again. The final note faded, but the consequences of Emma's choice had only begun. Adrian did not return immediately to the royal platform. Instead, he asked the master of ceremonies to summon the Silverpine elders and the royal advisor to the side of the ballroom. Mason remained with Vanessa near the banners, surrounded by allies who no longer looked certain which version of the evening they should support. Emma expected the discussion to continue without her. Adrian turned toward her. You raised a question of law before witnesses, he said. You should be present when it is answered. The invitation was not ceremonial. It gave her a place in the decision her words had created. Emma joined the small circle. One elder cleared his throat. Silverpine custom allows an alpha broad discretion over ceremonial standing. Custom, Emma said, is not the same as law. The elder looked uncomfortable, but he did not deny it. Adrian's advisor opened the regional code carried in a leather folio. Rejected mates retained full pack membership unless formally transferred or expelled for cause. Nothing in the law permitted an alpha to remove them from public ceremonies, restrict social invitations, or speak for their personal choices. Mason's order had depended on habit, not authority. Adrian looked at the elders. Then the problem is larger than one interrupted dance. No one argued. Emma understood what came next. Public recognition would mean little if another rejected Omega could be hidden at the next gathering. Add the protection to the ceremonial code, she said. Mason's attention snapped toward her. You are asking the crown to rewrite pack tradition because of a personal grievance. Emma faced him calmly. I am asking the pack to stop treating rejection as social removal. What happened to me only exposed the rule everyone assumed existed. Adrian did not approve the change at once. What language would you propose? He asked. He was making her define the consequence rather than turning her pain into his decree. Emma considered the question carefully. Any adult pack member in lawful standing may attend public ceremonies, accept invitations, and speak for personal decisions regardless of rejected bond status. An alpha may regulate conduct, but not erase presence. The advisor repeated the wording while writing it down. One elder objected that the rule could encourage public disputes. Emma looked toward the center of the floor. The dispute tonight was not created because I remained. It was created because someone believed I could be moved without being asked. Rachel, still near the wall, met Emma's eyes and gave one quiet nod. Adrian ordered the proposed language entered for immediate royal review and required Silverpine to suspend any conflicting custom until the review concluded. It was not instant forgiveness. Mason did not apologize. The elders did not suddenly welcome Emma. Their resistance remained visible in stiff shoulders and careful silence. But the system that had allowed them to treat her disappearance as normal now had to answer to written law. When the circle dispersed, Mason approached Emma alone. Vanessa stayed several steps behind him. You have made my leadership look weak, he said. Emma heard no regret, only consequence. I did not make you order me behind a column. He looked toward Adrian. You think royal attention will protect you forever. I protected myself before he crossed the floor. Mason had no answer that did not confirm her point. He turned away, taking with him the last expectation that she would soften the truth to preserve his pride. Adrian waited until Mason left. What do you want now? He asked. Emma looked around the ballroom. Some guests still whispered. Others watched her with new respect, and a few with open resentment. Nothing had become simple. That made the choice feel real. I want to finish the evening without being discussed as a symbol. Adrian inclined his head. Then I will not claim another dance unless you ask. He returned to the platform, leaving Emma free to remain, leave, or step onto the floor without his shadow deciding the meaning. For the first time that night, the space around her was not empty because she had been excluded. It was open because no one else held the right to fill it for her. The next song began without ceremony. No herald raised a staff. No alpha announced whom the floor belonged to. The quartet simply turned a page, and a new melody moved through Silverpine Hall, lighter than the one Mason had chosen at the beginning of the night. Emma stood where she had first taken shelter beside the marble column. The wine stain had dried against her sleeve. The western doors remained open less than 30 feet away. Hours earlier, they had looked like escape. Now they were only doors. Rachel approached with 2 glasses of water and offered one. You could leave whenever you wish, she said. Emma accepted the glass. I know. That knowledge made staying feel different. Across the ballroom, Mason stood with several elders, his attention fixed on the temporary order being copied into the ceremonial record. Vanessa remained near him, but the space between them had widened. Emma did not need to watch longer. Their choices belonged to them, and neither could define the next step she took. On the royal platform, Adrian listened to his advisor, then looked toward Emma. He did not descend. He had promised not to claim another dance unless she asked, and he was keeping the promise even with the whole room waiting to see what he would do. The restraint reached her more deeply than any public declaration could have. At the start of the ball, Mason had used a song promised to Emma as a way to push her toward the edge. Adrian had crossed the room once to offer her a choice. He would not cross it again simply because everyone expected a romantic ending. If another dance happened, the distance would be hers to close. Emma set down the glass. Rachel followed her gaze to the platform. Are you certain? She asked. Emma smoothed the mended cuff of her blue gown. For the first time tonight, she stepped away from the column. No command followed her. No one guided her path. Guests noticed as she crossed the open space, but their attention no longer felt like a wall. Some watched with approval, some with curiosity, and some with the discomfort of people forced to reconsider what they had accepted as normal. Emma let them look. Adrian saw her approaching and ended his conversation. He descended from the platform only after she reached the center of the floor, stopping several feet away. He did not extend his hand. He waited. "You said you would not ask again unless I did," Emma said. "I meant it." "Good." A quiet smile touched her face. "Then I am asking." Adrian's expression softened, but he still gave her the final choice. "May I have this dance, Emma Hale?" He used her name without title, pity, or possession. Emma held out her hand. "Yes." When Adrian took it, the orchestra continued the new melody without pause. He led her into the first step, but Emma chose the direction of the turn. The deep blue skirt moved across the same marble where she had stood alone, while Mason displayed another woman. This time, she did not search the room for his reaction. She looked at Adrian, then beyond him at the open floor, and felt no need to prove that she belonged there. During the next measure, Adrian lowered his voice. "What will you do when the royal review is complete? Decide whether Silverpine still deserves my work." And after that, Emma considered the question. "Choose again." He accepted the answer without asking for a promise. Around them, other couples slowly entered the floor. Rachel joined an older beta near the musicians. The young server crossed the eastern corner after checking the rug, fastening himself. Even the room had changed through actions, not apologies. When the music neared its end, Emma saw the western doors once more. At the beginning of the night, Mason had waited for her to disappear through them. Now they stood open behind a ballroom that could no longer pretend she was absent. Adrian raised their joined hands, and Emma completed the final turn by her own momentum. She had not stayed because a king rescued her. She had not danced because rejection made her valuable to someone stronger. She had crossed the floor because the next choice was hers, and this time, no one else had chosen the song.